One quiet morning at a small-town garage cafe, a retired military dog stops cold in front of a mechanic he has never met and reacts like he has found a ghost. That single moment opens a door to a buried war story, a dead Navy SEAL, and a medic who has spent 7 years carrying the weight of survival. This is a story about grief that never really leaves, and the strange ways love finds its way back.
The alarm clock never had a chance. Callan Royce was awake at 3 minutes to 6, just like every morning since Lena passed away. He did not need a clock. His body held on to the memories, his mind fought to escape. He remained motionless in the dim light which seeped past the lopsided blinds, hearing the old house groan around him. In 12 minutes the coffee pot in the kitchen would begin to brew. Down the hallway Barrett's door remained shut. His son slept deeply, a kind of rest Callan had not experienced in 6 long years. He moved his legs over the side of the bed, his feet finding the cold floor. That shock of cold was a welcome friend. The simple act of standing up focused his mind, pushing back the thoughts that always ambushed him in the morning haze. He fought back images of Lena, humming poorly in another room while hunting for a missing shoe. The man in the bathroom mirror was a stranger he no longer studied. 35 years felt much longer when counted in car repairs and house payments instead of celebrations. He let the tap run until the water was cool, splashing it on his face before grabbing his razor. It was the motion, not the clean shave, that counted. As Callan buttoned his work shirt, he heard Barrett's door groan open. His son stood in the hall, a vision in odd socks and a worn-out shirt featuring a hero Callan no longer recognized. The boy was 9 and outgrowing everything he owned. It seemed to happen suddenly, when Callan would glance up from an engine and see a boy who looked a month older than he had that morning. Barrett scrubbed at his eyes, a battered notebook held tightly in his other hand. Its cover was a mess of marker lines that looked like a failed attempt at camouflage. Morning already, Callan thought, noticing the brighter light slicing through the window. He gave a nod and pointed toward the kitchen. Barrett moved past him quietly, his soft footsteps making little sound as they went downstairs. The coffee machine was done brewing when they arrived. Callan filled his mug as Barrett hopped onto a counterstool, opening his notebook immediately. His son's breakfast choices were always changing. Last month was all about buttery toast. Now he only ate cereal from a blue box, with just a splash of milk at the very bottom. Without a word, Callan placed the cereal and milk on the counter. Barrett poured carefully, his tongue sticking out in concentration as he perfected the amount. Callan knew to let him be. He had learned long ago that some arguments were not worth the pain, especially after one disastrous morning with scrambled eggs left them both crying. Barrett was focused on the notebook, even as he ate. Callan saw the neat printing his son had been working on since the start of 3rd grade. The pages were full of lists and drawings. It was mostly normal stuff for a 9-year-old, like aliens and dinosaurs, but a particular drawing made Callan pause. It showed a person in some kind of uniform, drawn a little strangely. Next to it was a smaller person, holding a leash. When Barrett saw his father looking, he quickly turned the page. Callan decided not to ask and sipped his coffee. The clock showed 6:43. School began at 8:15, but the bus would be there at 7:30, starting the daily hunt for shoes and missing homework. Their morning routine was a well-worn path that made time move without much effort. Barrett finished his cereal and took the bowl to the sink on his own. Callan counted it as a win. He rinsed the bowl and put it with the other dishes he would wash later, or maybe the next day. It all depended on how tired he was after work. His backpack hung on its hook by the door, right where it belonged. Barrett's shoes, however, were missing, which started the daily search. Callan found them under the sofa, one still laced up from the day before. As Barrett struggled to put them on, Callan did a quick check of the backpack. He found lunch money inside the front pouch. A signed permission slip for next week's field trip was neatly folded inside. The math homework seemed done. But Callan was not about to check the answers himself. As always, the bus pulled up early at 7:28. Barrett slung his bag over his shoulder, but stopped at the door. He turned back, his expression showing he wanted to say something, but the words were stuck. Callan waited patiently. "When are we going to see Uncle Nash again?" The question came out of nowhere, cutting through the morning calm as it often did. Callan kept his expression calm and his tone even. "Soon," he replied. "Maybe this weekend, if it does not rain." That was enough for Barrett, who nodded and walked out the door. Callan watched his son get on the bus and vanish from sight. He saw the bus drive away, its red lights blinking at the corner before it disappeared. The house always felt huge and empty after Barrett left. He finished the last of his coffee by the sink, staring at a backyard that desperately needed mowing. The day ahead felt heavy with its own familiar schedule. He had to open the garage at 8. The appointment book was waiting. Mrs. Henderson's car needed its oil changed, and the Ramirez truck needed new brakes. A call yesterday about a transmission problem sounded like it would be costly. He washed his mug and added it to the pile. If the traffic lights were on his side, the drive to the shop took 11 minutes. He took his keys from the hook next to his son's and locked the house. Royce's garage was on a corner where the factory district slowly turned into shops. Callan's dad started the business in 1987, when local factories were busy day and night. Those factories were now self-storage places and fancy bakeries, but the garage was still there. The sign was faded and needed a new coat of paint, a job Callan had put off for 3 years. He pulled into the owner's parking space and opened the large bay doors. The scent of oil, steel, and sweet antifreeze immediately filled the air. His tools were all on the pegboard, arranged in his own unique order. In the middle of the garage, the hydraulic lift was ready for the day's work. A coffee station sat in the back, in the space his dad had meant for an office. Callan never saw the need for one. He had put in a big coffee machine, 4 random tables, and chairs that did not match. A chalkboard offered just 3 choices: coffee, tea, or water. Customers enjoyed it. They would hang out while their car was being fixed, or just stop by for a quiet moment before their own workday started. Mrs. Henderson was not due until 9. Callan got the service bay ready and checked his supplies. His morning went by smoothly, filled with the steady pace of fixing cars. Draining oil, changing filters, and replacing brakes were all jobs with clear steps and predictable results. Everything moved neatly from broken to repaired. He was cleaning his hands with a rag when a bell rang over the front door, the one to the coffee shop. A look at the clock showed it was 11:15. It was too late for the morning rush, and too early for the lunch crowd. He threw the rag down and walked to the front, ready to redirect a lost customer. The door connecting the shop to the cafe was held open. He could see that nearly all the tables were free, except for one in the corner. A woman was sitting there, her back mostly against the wall. From that seat she could easily watch both the main entrance and the garage door. Callan immediately noticed how she sat. It was a strategic position. He recognized the habit from his brother, Nash. She had on a heavy jacket and jeans, even though it was a warm day. Her hair was tied back simply, for convenience rather than fashion. He guessed she was in her late 20s or early 30s. Unlike most people, she was not staring at a phone. Her eyes were constantly moving, taking in the whole room with a hidden purpose. Next to her, a German shepherd sat perfectly still, a sign of intense training. Callan could see the patches on the dog's vest, even from a distance. The sign on the vest was clear: service animal, do not pet. The vest itself was clean, but frayed at the edges from long and dedicated use. Callan noticed the woman's right leg was extended from the table at a strange angle. It took him a second to see why. A prosthetic limb began just below her knee, visible where her pant leg had ridden up. She made no effort to hide it. The carbon fibre, blade-style foot rested on the floor, catching a glint of light from the window. Callan forced himself to move forward instead of staring. The sound of his boots on the concrete floor announced his approach. Her eyes followed him the entire way to the counter. The dog tilted its head to watch him, but its body stayed put. It was morning, time for coffee. The woman's eyes darted to the menu on the wall, then came back to his face. Her voice was softer than he had anticipated. "Just a black coffee, please." He moved to the other side of the counter, reaching for a clean mug from the overhead rack. The coffee pot had been on for more than an hour, meaning the liquid inside was likely a bit harsh. He poured a cup for her regardless and brought it to her table. She took it with both of her hands, her fingers embracing the warm ceramic as if to test its heat. "Is there anything else?" She shook her head no, but then paused as if she had another thought. Her attention drifted beyond him toward the tool board hanging in the open garage, where every tool had its own outline. "I noticed the help wanted sign by the road." Callan's eyes followed her line of sight, then returned to her. He had placed that sign there 6 weeks ago and completely forgotten it. He needed someone for the cafe during busy times, a person to serve coffee and clean tables while he repaired cars. He had spoken with 3 candidates. 2 of them did not even show up for a trial run. The third person worked for 4 days and then quit, saying the early hours were not for her. "Are you looking for a job?" "We still need someone." Callan thought about the simple tasks: pouring coffee, tea, and water, handling money, and wiping down tables. The woman looked directly at him as she replied. She did not seem nervous or try to exaggerate her skills. The dog remained perfectly still beside her, calm and well-behaved. These were promising indicators. "What experience do you have, not with serving food, if that is your question? But I am good at following directions, and I am always on time." At least she was honest. Callan valued that quality, perhaps more than he should. He was about to ask another question when he saw something move outside the window. 3 men dressed for construction work were walking toward the entrance. They were regulars from the job site down the road. They typically stopped by around 11:30 for coffee before their lunch break. A little bell jingled when they came inside. Callan gave them a nod and stepped back to his post behind the counter. The workers' loud voices filled the small room, continuing a discussion about an issue with a concrete delivery. They ordered 3 coffees and drank them standing right there, which completely obstructed Callan's view of the woman's table. After they departed about 15 minutes later, he saw that she had relocated. She had not left, just moved to a different spot. She was now seated 2 tables nearer to him, yet she kept a careful position that allowed her to see both doors. The dog had moved with her, settling down again without any apparent signal. Callan took the coffee pot and went to offer her a refill. She held her mug firmly as he poured, her knuckles turning pale from her tight grip. "Those men," she asked, "did they have that table reserved?" Callan was confused. "What?" "The table where I was sitting before. One of them looked at me as if I was in his seat. They do not have a designated seat. All the tables here are first come, first served." She seemed to take in this news with a slight nod, but her face showed a hint of doubt. The dog adjusted its position, and Callan saw its gaze repeatedly flick back to her face, as if checking on her like a trained service animal. The front door swung open once more. This time it was the Ramirez family, a group of 4. They had brought their truck in that morning to have the brakes checked. Callan had asked them to return after they ate lunch. The family filled the tiny cafe space. The 2 children immediately ran to the window to watch the cars go by. Mr. Ramirez came to the counter as his wife guided the kids away from the tables. Callan took their truck keys from a hook near the cash register. "It is all done. The rotors were in good shape, so I only needed to smooth them out. The brakes should be silent now. Mr." Ramirez took out his wallet and paid with cash while Callan prepared the invoice. The entire exchange was over in less than 5 minutes. The family bustled out together in a wave of sound and movement, the bell announcing their departure. When Callan looked over, the woman had changed her seat yet again. This time she was even farther away, tucked into a corner close to the restroom. Her cup of coffee remained on the table, completely untouched. Her dog had also found a new spot, now lying on the floor between her chair and the main path. Callan approached her carefully, making sure she saw him coming. Her shoulders tightened with a small, tense movement that many would not have noticed. "You keep changing tables." She stared down at her coffee. Her prosthetic leg was now easy to see, its blade-like foot positioned as if she were prepared to get up in an instant. "I can go if I am in your way." "You are not in the way at all. I was just curious why you are moving around." She clenched her jaw for a second before answering. "People were looking at the tables I chose. I assumed they might have needed the space for themselves." Callan scanned the empty cafe. Other than her, there was no one else there. The next wave of customers would not arrive until after 1 o'clock. "No one else needs the space at the moment. You are free to sit anywhere you like." She still looked uncertain. The dog let out a quiet noise, almost a whine. She immediately lowered her hand to its head, her fingers stroking its fur behind an ear with a practised motion. "What is your dog's name?" "Jericho." "That is an interesting name." She offered a faint smile. It felt like the right name for him. Callan found that he was smiling too, without really knowing why. He pointed to the empty chair at her table. "Would it be all right if I joined you?" His question appeared to take her by surprise. She looked at the chair, then at him, and finally down at Jericho. The dog was still, but its focus was now entirely on Callan, watching him with an intense gaze that was more than just simple curiosity. "This is your cafe." "That is not what I asked you." She paused for a moment, then gave a tiny nod of approval. Callan sat down across from her. From this closer view he could notice more about her. A thin scar ran along her jaw, vanishing into her hair. The sleeves of her jacket were rolled up just enough to show lean, muscular forearms, the kind built from practical work, not from workouts at a gym. Her hands had old, tough skin on the palms, the type you get from gripping things tightly over and over. "You have not told me your name yet." "Sloane. My name is Sloane Merritt. I am Callan Royce. This is my shop." She nodded, as if she had already guessed that. Her gaze drifted past him again to the garage, which was visible through the doorway. She saw the neatly arranged tools on the wall, the vehicle lift in the main work area, the calendar marked with service appointments written in his own hand. "You do quality work?" "I certainly try. I have been doing this long enough to know my way around." "How long is that?" "I learned from my father. He started this business in 1987. I took it over about 6 years ago." Sloane's focus seemed to sharpen at his words. "What caused that?" "6 years ago." Callan felt that familiar pang in his chest. It always appeared when he had to quickly summarize what had been a long and difficult period of sorrow and stress. "My wife passed away. I had a child to raise alone. My dad was already close to retiring, so we just sped up his plan." "I am sorry to hear that." Her words were simple and direct. They were not cold, but they did not have the forced sympathy that he was used to hearing. Callan actually found that he liked it better. "What about your story? What made you come to this town?" Sloane's grip on her coffee mug tightened just a little. "I am just passing through." "I saw your sign and decided to inquire." "Passing through on your way to where?" "Nowhere in particular." That sort of reply often meant a person was escaping a situation instead of heading toward one. But Callan knew from experience that everyone has their own hidden burdens. He decided not to press the issue and changed the subject. "You were in the military, weren't you?" The question seemed to make her go rigid. Jericho's ears perked up as he sensed the change in her posture. She did not reply immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost the small amount of warmth it had held moments before. "What gives you that idea?" "The dog. The way you carry yourself. The way you assessed the room when those construction workers came inside." Sloane's hand returned to Jericho's head, her fingers stroking his fur with a steady rhythm. "I served for a time. I got out a few years back." "Which branch were you in? Does that really matter?" "Not at all. I was just making conversation." She gave no further details, and Callan did not ask for any. A quiet moment passed between them. It was not entirely comfortable, but it was not tense either. A car drove by on the street outside. Inside the cafe, the refrigerator motor began to hum. Sloane was the first to speak. "The job opening. Is it still available?" "It is. The hours are 6 to 2 on the weekdays and 8 to noon on Saturdays for 30 hours a week. It involves serving coffee and keeping the place tidy. The wage is $15 an hour. When would you want me to start?" "You can start tomorrow if you like, or you can start today if you are ready." She looked at him as if she were trying to find a hidden catch, one she was certain must be there. "You do not need any references? Or a background check? Can you serve coffee without spilling it on customers?" "Yes." "Can you be here on time?" "Yes." "In that case, I do not need to know anything else. Most customers who come in here are just looking for a good cup of coffee and a quiet place to sit for 20 minutes. You can manage that." Sloane's face showed a mix of feelings before she landed on what looked like guarded optimism. "I can manage that." "Great. You will find a red apron behind the counter. The coffee area is very easy to figure out. You will find sugar and cream on that small table. When we have a quiet moment, I will show you the cash register." She got to her feet with care, a practiced but deliberate motion as she shifted her weight onto the artificial limb. Jericho was instantly up, remaining near her left. Callan also rose and motioned for her to come with him to the counter. While he pointed out the clean mugs, Jericho did something strange. Until that moment the dog had been a perfect example of discipline. But then he left Sloane's side and approached Callan directly. He was not hostile or eager to play. He simply came over and sat right before him, so close Callan could feel his body heat. Jericho gazed at him with sharp focus, not like a pet, but like a trained dog on a mission. His ears were alert, and his body was stiff with concentration. The dog's entire stance seemed to say he knew something important about Callan, something he could only express by being completely still. Sloane's sharp, startled voice broke the silence. "Jericho, heel!" But the dog remained motionless. He kept his intense gaze on Callan, making the hairs on his neck stand up. "Jericho, heel now." Still, the dog did not obey. Callan stayed perfectly still, knowing a sudden move could provoke an unknown reaction. He had experience with service animals. Nash used to bring them home on leave to help them relax in a normal setting for a while. The dogs were gentle after they knew you were safe, but they could instantly switch to duty mode, and in that moment they transformed completely. Sloane cautiously came around the counter. She reached for Jericho's collar, but his eyes stayed on Callan. Her composure was visibly failing. She was truly shaken. "He never acts this way." "I cannot figure out what he is." Her voice trailed off. Callan saw that her attention had shifted to the wall behind him. He looked back to find what she was staring at. A picture in a plain black frame was hanging there. It was placed between the menu and the tool rack. Callan had hung it 3 years ago, and had long since stopped noticing it. The photo showed 2 men in military gear, smiling in the bright sun with their arms on each other's shoulders. They both had tired smiles, the kind you see after a hard job is done. Callan was the man on the left, looking younger and thinner before any grey appeared in his hair. The other man was taller and more muscular, with a similar face shaped by military life. A little brass plate underneath read, "Lieutenant Nash Royce, Navy SEAL, 1985 to 2019. When Callan looked back at Sloane, all the colour had drained from her face. She had stumbled back, her hand on the counter as if to steady herself. Jericho was no longer focused on Callan. He was now close to Sloane, his training forgotten as he sensed her deep alarm. Sloane tried to speak, but no words came out at first. "Nash Royce," she finally breathed, almost inaudibly. A cold feeling spread through Callan's gut, a sense that his world was about to change. "He is my brother," was my brother. Sloane retreated another step, her hand clutching Jericho's fur so tightly that the dog whimpered. She stared at the picture as if she were seeing a ghost. When did he pass away? Callan's throat tightened. 2019, in September. Where? Afghanistan. Kandahar. Sloane let out a strange noise. Her prosthetic foot made a soft scraping sound on the floor as she moved. Her hand on Jericho's head was now trembling noticeably. Callan came around the counter with slow, deliberate steps, like he was approaching a frightened horse. "What is it?" he asked. She did not reply. Her gaze was fixed on the photograph, on Nash's face. She was still extremely pale. At last she spoke, her voice broken and raw. "I knew him. I knew your brother." The small cafe felt like it was shrinking. Callan heard the words and knew what they meant, but he could not process them. Nash had been gone for nearly 7 years. All of his friends were other SEALs, men from his special units that Callan knew little about. This woman seemed too young to have served with Nash for very long. "How did you know him?" Callan asked. Sloane just shook her head, a movement that seemed out of her control, as if fighting a memory. "I cannot do this. I have to go." She spun around and faced the exit. Jericho stayed with her, placing his body between her and Callan. He was now clearly in a protective posture. Callan made no move to stop her. He did not speak or reach for her. He simply observed her unsteady walk across the room, a clear sign of her distress. She had her hand on the doorknob when he finally said a word. "Wait." His voice was quiet, but it had an authority that made Sloane freeze. She did not turn, but her grip on the handle was so tight her knuckles were white. "If you knew my brother, I need you to tell me. Please." Sloane took a long, visible breath. She remained facing the door. Her reply was a whisper he could barely catch. "You do not want to know. Believe me. Try me," he insisted. Then she turned, a slow and difficult motion. Her face was still just as pale. In fact, she looked even worse, as if just standing there was a huge struggle. "Nash was my commanding officer for 6 months." Callan considered this. The time frame seemed unlikely, but it was not impossible. Nash had served many tours in Afghanistan. It could have been any one of them. "What unit were you in?" Her expression told him she could not answer. It was likely classified information that he was not cleared to know. He dropped the subject. "When was this?" "Early 2019. That was Nash's final tour, the one he never returned from." Callan's heart began to beat faster, as it always did when he neared the truth of what occurred. The government report was brief and vague. It mentioned enemy fire and that casualties were taken. The words told him nothing real. "Were you with him when he died?" Sloane's hand fell from the door. She wavered, and Callan thought for a second that she was about to collapse. Jericho moved in to steady her. Her reply was almost silent. Yes, that one word filled the space between them with a meaning Callan could not yet understand. He had a million questions. He needed to know what really happened, not the clean version from the reports. But Sloane seemed so fragile, as if another question would break her. So he chose a simpler path. "You need to sit. I need to go. You look like you might faint." Sloane looked at the tables, then at him. Her face showed a mind at work, weighing choices he could only imagine. At last, with a single nod, she walked back to the closest table. She did not immediately sit, but stood by the chair, one hand on its back. Callan went and poured a hot coffee. He added sugar automatically, just how Nash liked it for an energy boost. He brought the cup to her table. "Drink this," he said gently. "We can talk after, if you feel up to it, or we can be quiet." Sloane eased into the chair, moving like someone in constant pain. Jericho took his post between her and the entrance, ever the guardian. She held the warm mug in her hands, but did not take a sip. A long silence fell. A truck rumbled by outside. Then the fridge turned off, leaving the room nearly quiet. Callan took the seat opposite her, moving slowly so as not to startle her. When she began to talk, she kept her eyes on her coffee cup. "My job was combat support. I coordinated medical evacuations. Your brother's team was retrieving a key target from a location near Kandahar. The mission failed." "How badly?" "Badly enough that I lost this," she said, pointing to her prosthetic leg. "And badly enough that Nash and 3 other soldiers never came home." Callan felt a tightness in his chest. He knew Nash died on a mission, but the specifics were classified, or perhaps just too horrible for the family to hear. He had created his own story over the years, using his imagination to fill the gaps. But his story never involved a young woman like this, one who shared the very wounds that had taken his brother. "What happened out there?" he asked. Sloane shook her head. "I am not allowed to discuss the mission. It is classified. Tell me about Nash." She glanced up, and her gaze held a deep sorrow Ken recognized from his own reflection on difficult mornings. It was a guilt that time could not erase, one that had dug in deep and made itself at home. He had been a good officer, always protective of his team. He always made sure we all understood the mission before we went in. The switch from past to present tense felt heavy with unspoken meaning. "Did you know him for long?" "Long enough. We completed 3 missions together before Kandahar. And Jericho, how is he connected?" Sloane's hand instinctively went to the dog's head. That was not his name back then. His official designation was K-9417. He was assigned to Nash for the final 2 months of their deployment. Callan looked at the dog with a new sense of clarity. Jericho stared back with the same piercing eyes that had focused on Callan just moments before. Military service dogs are trained to form a powerful bond with their handlers, protecting and serving beside them in situations that would overwhelm most animals. If Jericho was Nash's dog, why is he with you now? When a handler is killed, the dog is typically reassigned or retired. Jericho was far too young for retirement, but he seemed unable to connect with a new handler after Nash. They assigned him to 3 different people. He emotionally shut down with every one of them, so they offered him to Mulmy since I had served with them. That was very thoughtful of them. Sloane let out a bitter laugh. Thoughtful is not the word I would choose. It was more about practicality. I was already being medically discharged. They probably thought if the dog could not work, he could at least be a support animal for someone who needed him. "And you needed him." "You still do?" she asked, her voice softening. "Jericho helps keep me steady when my thoughts get too loud." Callan knew that feeling better than she could possibly imagine. Barrett had a similar role in his life, giving him a purpose to wake up each day and stick to routines that might otherwise fall apart. The key difference was that Barrett was his son, not his service animal. The bell on the front door chimed. Both Sloane and Ken looked toward the entrance to see an elderly man, a familiar face who came in for coffee once or twice a week. The man gave a slight nod as he walked to the counter. Callan stood up. 1 moment. He poured the coffee, took the payment, and made some light conversation about the local weather and the new construction downtown. The whole exchange lasted less than 3 minutes. By the time he came back to the table, Sloane had shifted her position. Her chair was now angled to give her a clear view of both the front door and the garage entrance. Jericho had also moved, keeping himself between her and any potential danger. The old man took a seat by the window with his newspaper. Kalen sat down again, facing Sloane, and spoke in a low voice. Why did Jericho have that reaction to me? She had been avoiding his gaze, but her eyes finally met his. Dogs have a powerful memory for scents. You likely smell the way Nash did. It could be the same soap, deodorant, or something in your jeans. Jericho recognized it. The answer was logical, but it raised new questions Ken was not sure he was ready to ask. If the dog could remember Nash's scent after 7 years. What other memories did he hold? What did he witness that night near Kandahar? Sloane seemed to read his mind, speaking before he could ask the question. He was with Nash when he died. He never left his side until the medical helicopter arrived. Did he suffer? The question escaped Kalen's lips before he could stop it. He saw Sloane react as if he had physically hit her. Her grip on the coffee mug tightened so much he thought it might shatter. He was not conscious. I made certain of it. Her words implied she had been close enough to make medical choices for Nash. Kalen pictured the scene. His brother dying in a foreign land as this woman fought to save him, surrounded by the chaos of explosions. Thank you for being with him. Sloane's face contorted with pain. Do not thank me. I am the reason he went back in. What are you talking about? It means I was the one who got hit first. I was down, and he came back to get me instead of leaving with the others. If he had just kept going, if he had just left me there. She trailed off, her jaw tight with emotion. Jericho let out a soft whine and leaned more firmly against her leg. Ken noticed her hand was trembling on the table. He never would have left you. That is not the man Nash was. You were not there. You cannot know. I know my brother. He would have gone back for anyone on his team. It is what made him such a good leader. Sloane's eyes were now shiny with tears she fought to hold back. The cafe suddenly felt cramped, the walls closing in. The old gentleman with his newspaper seemed unaware of the intense conversation just 10 feet away, lost in the world of print. Kalen slowly reached his hand across the table, giving Sloane a chance to pull away. She did not. He placed his hand over hers, which was still clutching the mug. Her skin felt cold, even with the warm coffee. Whatever you feel responsible for, whatever guilt you have been carrying, Nash would not want that. He made his choice. You made yours. That is how it goes in a war zone, is it not? Everyone does what they believe is necessary in that instant. You do not understand, then make me understand. She drew her hand away, hugging her arms as if trying to stay warm. When she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. There were 4 of us injured when the building was attacked. Me, Nash, and 2 others. The helicopter could only carry 3 people on its first trip. I was the most seriously wounded, so I was taken first. Nash stayed with the other 2 to wait for the second helicopter, but it was delayed by enemy fire. By the time it finally landed, Nash had lost too much blood trying to save the others. Kalen processed this new information, filling the voids in the story he had held for 7 years. The official report never included these details. It only mentioned casualties and recovered remains. It said nothing of difficult choices, delayed aid, or a hero bleeding out while waiting for a rescue that arrived too late. The others made it? Yes. Then Nash did his job. He saved their lives, but it cost him his own. That was the choice he made. Sloane shook her head, and the tears finally fell, streaming down her face. She did not bother to wipe them away. You should be angry with me. You should be blaming me. Why would I ever do that? Because I am the reason your brother is gone, and I am the one who is still here. The raw agony in her voice struck Kalen with the force of a punch. He had spent years learning to live with his own grief, to function around the emptiness Nash's death had created. But this was something else entirely. This was from someone who was there, who saw it all, and who carried the heavy burden of being a survivor. I do not blame you. Nash made his choice. You made yours. Neither of you was wrong. The door chimed once more. This time a group of 4 people entered, 2 men and 2 women dressed for the office. They were likely from one of the new businesses in the area. They walked to the counter, deep in their own conversation, unaware of the emotional scene unfolding at the back table. Kalen rose from his chair. I have to get this. Please do not go. Please. Sloane did not answer. She remained seated, tears still falling, as Jericho stood faithfully by her side. Ken went to the counter, took their orders, poured coffee, and handled the payment. The entire process took less than 5 minutes, but when he looked back, Sloane's table was empty. The front door was open just a crack, revealing a sliver of the street outside. Jericho was also gone. Kalen quickly checked the garage area, hoping she had gone that way, but it was empty. She had vanished while his back was turned, leaving as quietly as she had appeared. He walked over to the table where she had been. The coffee mug was still on the table, mostly full. The surface of the liquid had faint ripples from being moved recently. Next to it, held down by the sugar container, was a folded piece of paper. Kalen picked it up and unfolded it. The writing was neat and precise, with the perfect lettering of a soldier. I am sorry, I cannot do this. Tell Barrett his uncle was a hero. He read the note 2 times, trying to find more meaning in the few words. Barrett. She somehow knew about his son, Barrett. Nash must have talked about his nephew during their time together. He must have shared pictures or stories during the quiet moments between missions. Ken carefully folded the note and put it in his pocket. He felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the kind that comes when too many emotions compete for space. He felt relief at finally meeting someone who was with Nash in his final moments. He felt frustration that she left before he could learn more, and he felt a deep concern for a woman carrying a trauma as heavy as his own. The group from the office found a table and sat down. The old man turned another page of his newspaper. The normal daily routine of the cafe continued around Kalen as if nothing important had just happened. He looked at the photograph on the wall, at Nash's slightly crooked smile and the effortless confidence that had always defined his older brother. 7 years gone, but still sending ripples into the present, still bringing people together across time and space in ways Ken could never have imagined. The afternoon wore on. Customers came and left. Kalen got to work on a brake job and an oil change, keeping his hands busy with familiar tasks while his mind replayed everything Sloane had told him. He locked the shop at 6, trying to believe the mysterious woman was gone for good. At home, his son Barrett was buried in homework. The boy glanced up, a silent hello, before focusing on his math again. Kalen started making spaghetti, a meal Barrett liked, while searching for the right words to explain his day. He ended up saying nothing at all. During dinner, Barrett excitedly described a volcano project for school. Kalen nodded along, but his mind was on the folded note in his pocket and the woman who gave it to him. Once Barrett was asleep, Kalen finally laid the note out on the kitchen table. The note said to tell Barrett his uncle was a hero. That single word felt too small for such a big thing, but perhaps simplicity was the whole idea. When all the difficult details fade, only the truth remains. Nash was a hero. His phone suddenly buzzed, a message from a number he did not recognize. His heart leaped. It was from Sloane. She apologized for leaving and said she was ready to talk tomorrow. He stared at the text, then replied that she could come by the garage any time. Her "thank you" came back instantly. Kalen set the phone down and gazed at Nash's photo on the refrigerator. It was a different photograph, but still the same Nash. Tomorrow he hoped to understand his brother's last days. Sloane was returning, and perhaps they could help each other heal. He sat in the silence, absorbing the day's heavy mix of sorrow and sudden hope. Some questions were answered, but so many new ones appeared. He never imagined he would find a link to his brother's final moments. Outside, streetlights began to glow, fighting back the night. Sloane showed up at 8:30 the next morning, much earlier than he thought she would. He was working on a Toyota when Jericho the dog panted, signaling their arrival. She had on the same jacket but different pants. Her hair was tied back so tightly he could see a small scar over her ear, hidden the day before. Caelan stood up from the car's engine, cleaning his hands on a dirty rag. She paused in the doorway, her shoulders tense, as if she had rehearsed this all night but was still uncertain. "The coffee is fresh," he said. "Help yourself." She gave a single nod and walked to the counter, Jericho staying close by her side. Caelan noticed her hands were steadier today as she carefully poured a coffee and added sugar. The red apron was hanging on its usual hook. She stared at it for a moment, then took it down and tied it on. 15 minutes later, the morning rush began. First came the construction crew, then office workers, followed by the regular Thursday retirees. Sloane handled it all with incredible skill, serving coffee and cleaning tables efficiently. She was polite but distant, simply taking their orders without any small talk. She kept a professional tone with everyone. Caelan fixed the belt and started on a noisy alternator. He stayed close enough to hear what was happening in the cafe, listening to Sloane work. She used the cash register perfectly, gave the right change, and kept everything clean without needing any help. By 10 o'clock the crowd was smaller. She had served about 30 customers with no errors that he saw. He walked over while she was refilling sugar containers. Jericho was resting under a table, his eyes watching everything. "You are very good at this," Caelan said. Sloane barely looked up. "It is not a complicated job. Most people find a way to mess it up, but you did not." She placed the refilled dispenser on the counter. "I am good at following instructions. It is my military training." Caelan knew she had said that on purpose, giving him permission to ask his real questions. He leaned on the counter, speaking quietly so the other customers could not hear. "How long were you in the service?" 8 years total," she said. 4 active, 4 in the reserves, then I went active again. That made her about 30, just as he had figured. She was young enough to have been with Nash on his last tour, but old enough to have the special skills she clearly possessed. "What did you do?" he asked. "A medic?" "A combat medic, yes," she confirmed. "I was close enough to the action to need the same training." The puzzle pieces were forming a picture Caelan was not sure he wanted to see. Medics always go where the fighting is heaviest. If she was with Nash, she saw the worst things. "Is that it? Were you the medic for his team?" Sloane's hand stopped moving. She clenched her jaw for a second, then spoke. "I was assigned to his platoon for 6 months. I went on every single mission," she added. "You cannot stay behind when you are the only one who can save a life out there." She said it so calmly, but her words were heavy. Caelan pictured Barrett, safe in his classroom. He thought about the clean, simple idea of war he had always imagined. Sloane was talking about a completely different world, a place where 19-year-old kids were dying, and people like her were their only hope. "What was Nash like?" Caelan asked. I mean, over there." She started working again, but her hands were less steady now. He was very careful, very methodical. "Some commanders see their soldiers as just game pieces," she explained. "They accept losing some to win. Nash was different. He knew all his men's names, who had children, who was engaged. He cared about them as people. That made it much worse when we lost someone." Caelan noticed the pain in her voice as she spoke those final words. She had said, "was careful," the past tense. "The way you talk about someone who is gone. Did he ever mention us? Me and Barrett?" "All the time," she said. "He showed me pictures. Your son had his eyes, even back then." A knot formed in Caelan's chest. Barrett was just a baby when Nash died, too young to remember him. Barrett only knew his uncle through old photos and the stories Calen told him, but the thought that Nash carried his picture and that Sloane recalled his son's eyes after 7 years was powerful. Just then the bell on the door rang. It was the mail carrier, a familiar face from her regular route. Sloane immediately went to help the customer, returning to her efficient and professional manner. Calen went back to the garage to work on the alternator, but his hands felt awkward and unsteady. By lunchtime the cafe was quiet, with only an older gentleman doing a crossword puzzle over his coffee. Sloane had cleaned everything twice and was starting on inventory when Calen came out. "You should take a lunch break. There is a diner just down the street." She shook her head. "I brought food. I will eat in my car." "You can eat in here if you want," he said. "Chair. We have a table in the back." Calen could see her hesitate for a moment. She was clearly torn between being polite and doing what she really wanted. Politeness won. "That is all right," she said. "I should check on Jericho and give him some water." The dog seemed fine, but Calen did not push it. He saw her grab her coat and walk out with Jericho. He watched through the window as she walked to an ordinary-looking car parked far away. It was the type of car you would never notice. She did not return right away. Calen waited 15 minutes, then 20. After 25 minutes, he worried she had decided this was all too much and driven off. After 30 minutes, he saw her get out and take Jericho to a grassy spot. She came back inside at 12:45, 1 hour after she left. Without a word, she put the apron on and stood behind the counter, looking as if she had worked there for years. The afternoon was calmer than the busy morning, but still had a steady flow of customers. Calen focused on his repair work, but kept an ear on the cafe. Sloane treated every person with the same polite efficiency. She was not overly friendly, but she was not rude, just professional. At 2:15 her shift was over. She took off the apron and put it on its hook. Calen was busy with an engine, but stopped to walk her out. "Will you come back tomorrow if you are still willing?" he asked. "I will," she replied. "Same time." She nodded, but paused at the door. "Can I ask a question?" "Of course, model." "Why did you hire me?" she asked. "You did not check my references. You never asked about my military discharge. You did not even ask why I walk with a limp." She stated that most places refuse to hire people with obvious disabilities. Calen chose his words with care. The real answer was difficult, wrapped up in his own past and how he was treated after his wife, Lena, passed away. He gave her the simple version. "You needed work. I needed an employee. Everything else is unimportant." Her expression softened, not quite a smile, but something close. "Thanks," she said. She then left with her dog, Jericho, walking beside her. They both moved with the same efficient sense of purpose. Calen watched as she opened her car door and helped Jericho get inside. Her actions were gentle, even though the prosthetic made some movements clumsy. Later, his son Barrett returned from school, talking excitedly about a science project. It apparently involved building an electrical device. Calen nodded and listened as Barrett explained circuits, not understanding much but enjoying his son's infectious enthusiasm. While they ate dinner, Barrett brought up the one topic Calen had been trying to avoid. "When are we going to visit Uncle Nash?" Calen lowered his fork and looked at his son across the table. "This weekend, on Saturday morning, after, we can go to the garden store for the flowers you want to plant." Barrett's face lit up. "Can we take something for the grave? Maybe some flowers?" his son asked. "We can certainly do that." The topic of conversation changed, but Calen's thoughts remained at the cemetery. He pictured the granite marker on his brother's grave. He thought about how Sloane was there when Nash died, how she watched him die while they waited for a helicopter that was too late. That evening, after Barrett went to sleep, Calen opened his laptop and did something he had avoided for 7 years. He began searching for information on the mission in Kandahar where Nash was killed. The official records were brief and mostly classified, but he found some small pieces. There were news articles about a joint operation against high-ranking Taliban leaders. He found casualty lists with names, but no other information. There were a few sanitized press releases from the military mentioning a successful mission with unfortunate losses. Nothing mentioned a medic who had survived. There was nothing about delayed medical transport or the life or death decisions made during the fight. The official account was scrubbed clean, reduced to a simple story. Callan closed the computer and sat in the quiet of his dark kitchen. Tomorrow Sloane would be back at work, and they would resume their careful dance around a subject neither one was ready to discuss. He knew he should just drop it. But Nash was his brother, and this woman was with him at the end. He could not ignore that powerful connection. A steady rain fell on Friday morning, looking like it would last all day. Sloane came in at 8:30, her jacket soaked with rain, and Jericho shook water all over the entryway. She put on her apron and started making coffee without a word, falling into their usual work rhythm. The rain kept some people away, but brought in others looking for a dry place. The small cafe filled with the low hum of conversation and the warmth of steaming coffee cups. During a slow period around 10 o'clock, Callan brought 2 mugs to her table. She was cleaning menus, her hands moving in a repetitive motion that seemed more like muscle memory than a conscious choice. He spoke quietly. "I looked into the Kandahar operation, the one where Nash died." Her hand stopped its movement, but she did not look at him. "There is not much public information. Most of it is classified." She finally spoke. "That is done on purpose." He asked, "Were there more casualties than the 4 you mentioned?" Sloane put down the rag, her knuckles turning white as she clasped her hands. "There were 6 killed in action in total," she said. "Nash and 2 members of his team. 3 support personnel died in secondary explosions when the building came down." Callan tried to grasp the number. 6 families had received the same devastating knock on the door that he had. 6 funerals, 6 folded flags, and 6 letters of condolence from officers who never even knew the men. "How many were wounded?" he asked. 11, not including myself. Most were stable enough to be evacuated normally. I was the only one in critical condition, so Nash had stayed for her, and for 2 others who could not be moved. I was not conscious at that point. I did not know he stayed until weeks later when I woke up in a hospital in Germany. Germany! That meant a field hospital first, then a long transfer. It meant weeks of surgeries and recovery before she was well enough to be told the news. Callan tried to picture it, waking up, missing a leg, and learning your commander died to save you. "Did anyone hold it against you?" he asked. She finally met his eyes, and the raw pain he saw there made him wish he had not asked. "Everyone," she said. "The surviving men from Nash's team," she explained. "They did not say it to my face, but I could see it." Why did the medic live when their lieutenant died? Why was she the priority when he was the one in charge? Callan shook his head. "That is not fair," she replied. "Fair has nothing to do with war. Results are what matter. Nash died, I lived." "Those are the only facts that matter," she finished. The bell on the door chimed as 2 people came inside, shaking off the rain. Sloane stood up right away, the conversation cut short by her job. Callan stayed at the table and watched her work. He saw her pour coffee and maintain the careful, professional barrier that she kept between herself and the world. Barrett phoned at lunchtime to ask if he could visit a friend. Callan said it was fine. He spent his own lunch break working on a car, replacing a water pump while the rain beat a steady rhythm on the garage roof. The task demanded his full attention, leaving no room to think about war or death or the woman next door who carried a weight of guilt that was too heavy for one person to bear. Sloane worked her shift until 2:15, Then she hung up the apron and got Jericho. She was almost at the door when Callan called out to her. "Tomorrow," he said, "I am taking Barrett to the cemetery to visit Nash's grave. You are welcome to come with us." She stopped in her tracks, her back to him. Jericho sensed her stillness and leaned against her leg. When she turned, her face was completely unreadable. "I do not think that is a wise idea," she said. "Why not?" he asked. "Because I do not belong there. I am not his family." He responded, "You were with him at the end. That means something." Sloane's hand tightened in Jericho's fur. Her voice was strained. "What time?" 9 o'clock, he said. "I can pick you up." "I have a car," she told him. "Then meet us there. Oakwood Cemetery, in the north section." She gave one sharp nod and left without another word. Callan stood alone in the shop and worried that he had just made a very big mistake. Saturday arrived clear and cool. The rain from the day before had washed everything clean and bright. Callan helped Barrett dress in a clean pair of jeans and a nice button-up shirt that was only for special days. The boy did not argue. He seemed to know that visiting Uncle Nash was an important event. They pulled into a florist's shop on the way. Barrett chose a bouquet of white lilies. He said he remembered hearing that Nash liked them, though Callan could not recall his brother ever having an opinion on flowers. The bouquet was simple and tasteful. It was the type of arrangement that would blend in with the other flowers and tributes left at the cemetery. Oakwood was a large place, covering 15 acres of gentle hills. Winding paths led through sections marked by stone benches. Nash's grave was under an oak tree in the new section for veterans, where all the granite headstones were identical. Sloane's car was already parked a few spaces down from where Callan stopped. She stood beside it with Jericho, wearing dark jeans and a sweater that made her look smaller than she did in her work jacket. Her prosthetic leg was more noticeable today, with the blade-style foot showing beneath her pant leg. Barrett got out of the car, holding the flowers. He saw Sloane and Jericho, and his eyes opened wide. "Dad, it is a dog," he said. "That is Jericho," Callan explained. "He belonged to Uncle Nash." The boy's face filled with pure delight. Callan had told him about military working dogs, and had even shown him pictures, but seeing a real one was completely different. "Can I pet him?" he asked. "You will have to ask his owner," Callan said. They walked over together, with Barrett staying close to his father's side despite his clear excitement. Sloane watched them get closer with an expression he could not quite read. It was a mix of worry and something gentler. Barrett's voice was soft and polite when he finally spoke. "May I please pet your dog?" Sloane looked at Jericho, who was sitting perfectly beside her. "He is great with children. Just let him smell your hand first." Barrett slowly reached out his hand, holding the flowers tightly to his chest. Jericho sniffed his fingers, gave them a single lick, and sat back down. A huge smile spread across Barrett's face, revealing the gap from a lost tooth. "He likes me." Sloane smiled back. "Yes, he does." "As long as you are gentle, you can pet him." Barrett carefully placed the flowers on the grass and used both his hands to scratch Jericho behind the ears. The dog accepted the affection with quiet grace, his tail wagging in a slow, steady rhythm. Callan watched his son with the animal that was there when Nash died, and a complicated feeling stirred inside him. Sloane was not looking at them any more. Her gaze went past them to the headstones among the trees. Her jaw was clenched, and her shoulders were stiff under her sweater. "Are you all right?" she answered. "No, but I am here. That is all that matters." They began walking toward Nash's grave. Barrett ran ahead, with Jericho jumping happily at his side. Sloane and Callan walked more slowly, a pace that was comfortable for her artificial leg. The path sloped gently up, lined with stone markers. Each one had names and dates, turning whole lives into simple carved letters. Nash's headstone was plain. It read, "Lieutenant Nash Royce, United States Navy SEAL, 1985 to 2019. Beloved brother and uncle. Someone, likely the cemetery workers, had cleared the old flowers from other visits. They had also straightened the small American flag next to the stone. Barrett knelt down. He carefully placed fresh lilies against the stone, his face serious. Callan stood right behind him, with a hand on his son's shoulder. Sloane had stopped a few feet away. She kept her distance as if she were scared to approach it. Jericho did not feel the same way. The dog walked forward on his own, past Barrett, and went straight to the headstone. He sniffed the bottom of the stone. Then he lay down right in front of it, putting his head on his paws. The way he lay there seemed intentional, like he was chosen to be there. A silent guard. Callan felt a lump form in his throat. Next to him, Sloane made a quiet sound, maybe a sob she was trying to hold back. Barrett looked over at them, his eyes wide. "Why is Jericho lying down?" Callan tried to find the right words for a 9-year-old. Dogs remember the people who were kind to them. Jericho loved Uncle Nash. He is just saying goodbye, but Uncle Nash passed away a long time ago. Some goodbyes just take a lot more time. Barrett seemed to understand this. He sat down next to Jericho and began telling the stone all about his science fair project. His voice echoed in the quiet morning air. Callan went to stand beside Sloane. He was close enough to see her hands were trembling. "This is the first time back, the first time at any military cemetery since I left the service," she said. She paused, then spoke more quietly. "The first time I have seen his name on a stone and not on a casualty list. It gets easier over time." "Does it really?" Her question was real. She was looking for an honest answer, not just empty words. Callan thought about lying to her. He could offer the kind of hollow comfort people often say in these moments. But Sloane deserved more than that. "No," he said, "it just becomes different. The sharp pain gets duller, but the empty space is always there." She nodded, as if he had confirmed what she already thought. She wrapped her arms around herself, holding herself together, even though it was not cold. Barrett was telling the headstone all about electrical circuits. His words were excited and full of detail. Jericho lay perfectly still, a furry protector keeping his post. The scene could have been peaceful, but a deep sadness filled the air. Sloane finally took a step forward. She moved to stand on the other side of the headstone from where Barrett was sitting. She looked down at Nash's name. Her eyes followed the letters, but she did not touch the stone. When she spoke, her voice was almost a whisper. "I am sorry. I am so sorry I could not save you. I am sorry that I am alive and you are not. I am sorry I ran from your brother yesterday instead of answering his questions." She stopped, her breathing shaky. "I am sorry for everything." Barrett was no longer talking. He looked back and forth between the two adults, his forehead wrinkled in confusion. Callan gave him a slight shake of his head, a quiet sign to be still. The boy understood and turned back to Jericho. Sloane lowered herself to her knees on the grass. Her prosthetic legs stuck out awkwardly. She pressed her hands flat on the ground in front of Nash's stone. It looked like she was trying to hold something down, or maybe pull something up. Callan was not sure which it was. "The day you died, I made a promise to myself. I swore I would live a good enough life for both of us, that I would achieve enough for two people, that I would make your sacrifice mean something." She let out a laugh that sounded bitter and broken. "I have been failing at that for 7 years. I worked jobs with no future, avoided anything important, drank too much, and slept too little. That is some tribute. You are still here. That is what counts." Sloane's head snapped up. Her eyes met Callan's across the grave. "Does it? Because from my perspective, being here just means I am taking up the space Nash should have. He should be the one here visiting his nephew. He should be teaching him about circuits and being the Uncle Barrett deserves." Her words hit with more force than she might have meant. Callan felt those words land deep inside him. They found the place where his own guilt resided, the part of him that always wondered why Nash had to be the one to die. Callan had a family to protect and a son who needed him. Barrett solved the tense moment by standing up. He walked around the headstone to where Sloane was kneeling. He looked at her with a serious expression. When he spoke, his voice had the pure honesty that only a child can have. "Uncle Nash died while saving people. My dad told me that. That means he believed saving those people was more important than coming home. He would not want you to feel sad because you were saved." Sloane stared at the boy as if he had just spoken a great truth. Tears were now streaming down her face. She did not seem to wipe them away or even notice them. Barrett reached out and gently patted her shoulder. It was the same way he comforted friends who fell on the school playground. "It is okay to be sad, but Dad says Uncle Nash would want us to be happy, too." Both feelings can be true at the same time. The simple truth of his words somehow made them more powerful. Callan watched as Sloane's composure finally broke. He saw her lean forward with sobs she had likely held in since Kandahar. Barrett kept his hand on her shoulder, staying patient and still. Jericho moved closer, pressing his body against her other side. Callan knelt down too, making a circle around Nash's grave. He put one hand on Barrett's back. He hesitated, then rested his other hand on Sloane's shoulder. She did not move away. She just let the sadness wash over her while 3 living people and a dog watched over the one they had lost. Time felt different in that place. It could have been 5 minutes, or it could have been 30. Eventually, Sloane's sobs softened into quiet, shaky breaths. She wiped her eyes on her sleeves and sat up, looking a little embarrassed. "I am sorry. I did not plan to fall apart like that." Barrett shook his head with the sincere honesty of a child. "My dad cries about Uncle Nash sometimes, too. It is okay." Sloane's eyes met Callan's, looking for confirmation. He just shrugged, not trying to deny it. Barrett noticed more than Callan often realized. "Can I tell you something about your uncle? Something I really think you should know?" Barrett nodded, excited to listen. Callan motioned for Sloane to go on. "The night he died, after I woke up in the hospital, one of his teammates came to my room. His name was Rodriguez. He had a broken arm and burns on his legs, but he was determined to come see me." She stopped for a moment, recalling the memory. "He told me that Nash told a joke just before the end. He asked Rodriguez if his fantasy football team was going to be terrible without him there to manage it." Callan felt a small smile form on his face, despite the sadness. That sounded just like Nash, finding a reason to laugh even in the worst situations. Rodriguez said he would never forget it. Here was this man, losing blood, likely knowing he would not survive, and he was making jokes to keep everyone else calm. Her voice grew softer. Nash died just like he lived, always putting other people first. Barrett took this in with the seriousness it deserved. Was he scared? If he was, he never let it show. I believe he had made his peace with it by then. The boy seemed happy with that answer. He went back to Jericho and sat down, leaning against the dog's warm body. Sloane used the headstone to help herself stand up. Her prosthetic leg made a soft clicking sound as it took her weight. Callan also stood, brushing the grass off his pants. "Thank you for being here. I almost did not come." She looked at the grave, then at Barrett and Jericho, and then at Callan. "I am glad I did, though. We come here every few months. You are always welcome to come with us next time." A change came over her face, like a small crack in the strong wall she had built around herself. "I would like that." They stayed for about 20 more minutes. Barrett filled the quiet with tales from school and about his friends. Sloane and Callan stood on either side of Nash's grave, like a pair of bookends. Jericho finally got up and shook his fur, letting them know it was time to go. The walk back to the cars was different from the walk to the grave. It felt lighter in a way, even with the sadness they had shared at Nash's Stone. Barrett talked about wanting his own dog one day, a German shepherd just like Jericho. Callan gave vague replies. He knew that this topic would come up again and again until he finally gave in or Barrett found something new to want. Back at the parking lot, Sloane opened her car door, but then stopped. "Do you two have plans for the rest of the day?" "Nothing special. We will probably go to the garden centre, then get some lunch." Barrett had been listening. "Can Sloane come with us?" The question just hung there in the air between them. Callan could see Sloane's first reaction was to say no. He watched her struggle with that instinct, and then he saw her decide to do something different. "If you do not mind us joining you, we would not mind at all." The garden centre was a huge place, full of greenhouses and outdoor plants. Barrett pulled them through all the different sections for vegetables, herbs, and flowers. He was full of excitement, even though he did not know the names of most plants. Sloane walked with Jericho. She sometimes pointed out which plants were poisonous to dogs and which ones were okay. They chose a flat of marigolds because Barrett loved the bright colours and Ken appreciated that they were durable. They also bought 3 tomato plants, which would likely not survive a month but seemed like a good lesson for the boy. Lunch was at a small diner with a dog-friendly patio. Barrett got a burger that was bigger than his face and ate about half of it before he said he was full. Sloane barely touched her salad, more focused on getting water for Jericho than eating. About halfway through their meal, Barrett finally asked the question that had been on his mind all morning. "How did you know my Uncle Nash?" Sloane put down her fork and looked over at Ken. He gave her a slight nod, letting her know she could answer in any way she felt was right. "I was a medic, which is a person who helps soldiers when they get hurt. I was on your uncle's team when we were far from home. Did you help save people?" "I certainly tried. Sometimes I could, and sometimes I could not. Uncle Nash was a hero. Did you save him?" The question hit her hard. Sloane's expression became unreadable as she put on a professional face. Callan was about to step in, but she answered before he could. Her voice was firm, even though the words were painful. "No, I was not able to save him, but he saved many others before he passed away. That was what was most important to him." Barrett thought about this as he chewed on a French fry. "So you are a hero too, because you tried." The simple truth in his words seemed to take Sloane by surprise. Her eyes blinked quickly, and then she gave a single nod. "Thank you for saying that." After that the talk moved to easier subjects. They talked about school, favourite meals, and if Jericho liked swimming more than running. It was just normal talk, the kind you would hear at countless tables all over the country. On the drive home, Barrett fell asleep in the back, his fingernails still dirty from the plants. Ken looked in the rearview mirror at his son's sleeping face, so calm and peaceful. Sloane's car was right behind them, and she pulled into the driveway after his truck. She helped him carry the plants to the backyard while Barrett slept on. They worked together in a comfortable quiet, placing the marigolds and tomatoes where they would get just the right amount of sun. When they were done, Sloane stood in the yard with Jericho by her side. She looked all around, as if she were memorizing every detail. She saw the tall grass, the fence that needed a new coat of paint, and the old swing set that Callan kept meaning to remove. "You have a really good life here." Nash would have been so happy to see his nephew growing up in a place like this. Ken wiped the dirt from his hands onto his pants. "We are doing all right. Better than all right." She paused for a moment, then spoke more softly. "Thank you for letting me be here today. I needed this more than I realized. You are always welcome to come back." "Barrett really likes you." "Just Barrett?" The question was so direct it surprised him. Callan looked directly into her eyes, and answered with the same level of honesty. "No, it is not just Barrett." In that quiet moment something was understood between them that did not need words. Sloane gave a small but real smile, the first one he had ever seen from her. "I should probably get going. Let you have your afternoon. I will see you on Monday morning." Yes, Monday morning. She helped Jericho into her car, gave one last wave, and drove off. Callan stayed in the driveway, watching until her car was out of sight. Then he went inside to wake his son and begin their evening. Later that night, with Barrett asleep, Callan sat alone with a beer he did not really want. He thought about the day, and about Sloane at Nash's grave, letting go of the sadness she had held on to for so long. He thought of Barrett's simple idea that you can be sad and happy at the same time, and how Jericho laid down by the headstone as if he had waited 7 long years for the chance to say his own goodbye. His phone buzzed. It was a text from a number he now knew was Sloane's. The message was simple: "Thank you for today, for everything. I think Nash would have been glad that we met." Callan replied right away. He definitely would have. "Sleep well," he added. Her response was almost instant. "You too." He finished his beer, rinsed the bottle, and placed it in the recycling bin that Barrett had covered in drawings. The house grew quiet with its usual nighttime sounds. He could hear a distant dog barking and the hum of the refrigerator turning on. The next day was Sunday. He had told Barrett they would work on his science project. He thought they might go to the hardware store for some things, and maybe get some ice cream later. Just a normal weekend, doing normal things that make up a life. But then Monday would arrive, and Sloane would be there at 8:30, putting on her red apron and serving coffee to people who knew nothing about what she had been through. And perhaps that was okay. Maybe just being present, doing your job, and finding small ways to live with your sadness was enough. Maybe that was the best any of them could do. Ken switched off the lights and went upstairs. He could hear his son's soft, even breathing from his room, unaware of the difficult journey of healing that was happening all around him. Some things always remain broken, some things heal slowly over time, and some things, like the bond between a lost soldier's brother and the medic who fought to save him, form something entirely new. Monday morning was foggy, so thick you could not see the street from the garage. Sloane showed up 10 minutes before her shift. She appeared from the grey mist with Jericho next to her, looking almost like a ghost. She put on the red apron without a second thought. This time she brought her own cup, filled it with coffee, and began wiping down tables that were already spotless. Callan was in the garage checking the fluids on a minivan, but he watched her. Something had definitely changed during the weekend. A wall that had been there, between being co-workers and being friends, was now gone. Sloane moved around the cafe with a new ease, not like she was on guard, but like she truly belonged. The morning was busy, but Sloane handled it all with growing confidence. She remembered the regulars' orders and knew how they liked their coffee without even asking. Even the construction crew that had made her nervous on her first day now said hello to her by name. She did not say much back, but she would nod, and that seemed to be all that was needed. Around 10 o'clock, things slowed down. One of the regulars, an older veteran named Frank, started talking to Sloane as she refilled his coffee. Callan was too far away to hear what they were saying, but he saw Frank point to Jericho's service dog vest. He saw Sloane's body get tense for a moment before she gave a short reply. Then Frank rolled up his sleeve and showed her a tattoo. It was old and faded, but it had probably been very bright many years ago. It was a Marine Corps symbol, easy to see even from a distance. Sloane's whole attitude changed in an instant. She relaxed, recognizing the shared experience of being in the military. They chatted for about 5 minutes. Frank did most of the talking, and Sloane listened carefully, showing she was truly interested. When Frank got up to leave, he gently patted her on the shoulder. She did not pull away. Callan cleaned his hands and walked over to her. What was all that about? Sloane was busy arranging the pastries. even though they were already perfect. He was asking where I served and which branch. Did you tell him? Just enough. Navy, Afghanistan, medical discharge. Jericho helped him figure out the rest. Frank is a good man. He lost his son in Iraq back in 2007. I had a feeling it was something like that. The way he looked at me, like he knew things he wished he did not. That is true for most of the veterans who come in. They know one of their own when they see them. Sloane shut the glass case and turned to look right at him. Is that the reason you hired me? Because I am one of them? I hired you because you needed a job and you were here on time. The rest of it is just part of your story. She looked at his face, searching for any sign that he was not being truthful, and seemed to accept his answer. Good. I do not want to be a charity case for anyone. You are not. You have been doing more than your share of the work from your very first day. The bell on the front door rang, stopping her from saying anything else. An elderly woman came in, using a walker to support herself. She moved slowly and carefully, like someone who knew that a single fall could mean a broken bone. Sloane went to help her right away, holding the door open so the woman could get through, and then helped her to the closest table. Rain fell again on Tuesday, a steady rhythm on the tin roof that made the whole garage echo. Barrett phoned at lunchtime to ask if he could stay late for the science club. Kalen gave him the okay, which freed him up to finally start a break job 3 days behind schedule. Sloane kept working her shift long after it officially ended at 2 o'clock. She did not ask for permission. She just brewed fresh coffee and wiped down the tables while Kalen fought with a pair of seized brake calipers. Around 4 o'clock, after the last customer went home and the rain continued to fall, she finally took off her apron. I have had something on my mind, Kalen said as he slid out from under the car, cleaning grease from his arms. So, about that sign out front. It says Royce's Garage and Cafe. But the cafe part is not really a business, is it? It is just 4 tables and a coffee pot. That is all it has ever been. Your dad added it years ago for customers waiting on their cars. It could be something special, if you wanted. Callan stood up, giving her all of his attention. What are you thinking? Sloane took out her phone. She showed him a list of notes she had clearly been working on. Her ideas were in perfect columns with details about costs and planning. We should expand the seating. We could add 6 more tables, and maybe some booths. We need to upgrade to a commercial coffee machine. We could hire a baker for fresh pastries instead of this pre-packaged stuff. We can make a place for veterans to hang out without it being an official club. Just a place that feels comfortable and safe. The notes were so specific, it was clear she had been planning this for a while. Callan scrolled through them, and he was impressed by her work. This is going to cost a lot of money. I am not sure I have that kind of cash right now. I know, but I checked the sales numbers from last week. You are making good money from just coffee sales. With a little marketing and better food, you could easily double that. You looked at my sales numbers? Sloane actually looked a little bit embarrassed. The cash register is not exactly password protected. I was not trying to snoop. I just saw the numbers when I was closing out for the day. Callan should have been angry that she invaded his privacy, but he was mostly just curious. Why do you even care? This is not your business. It is not mine yet, but it could be. Those words just hung in the air between them. They were full of meaning that Callan did not understand. Sloane seemed to know she had said too much. She quickly tried to fix it. I mean, as a worker. Someone who wants to see this place do well. You have only been here for a week. Yes, and I have had 10 different jobs in the past 3 years. I worked in fast food, in stores, and in warehouses. They were all temporary jobs. I could not handle the loud noises, or the crowds, or the thoughts in my own head. She looked around the small cafe. This is the first job where I do not feel like I am drowning. Her raw honesty made Callan's chest feel tight. He looked at her notes one more time, really thinking about them now. Her ideas were very good and practical. This was the kind of growth that could make the garage truly successful, not just barely surviving. Let me think about this. I need to look at the real numbers. I need to see what we can actually do. Sloane nodded, and he could see the relief in her shoulders as they relaxed. Take all the time you need. I am not going anywhere. That evening, after Barrett went to sleep, Callan looked at Sloane's notes and his own financial papers. Looking at the real numbers was discouraging. The garage was making a profit, but it was a very small one. Most months he made just enough to pay the mortgage and the bills and to take care of Barrett. There was not much left over. He was about to give up when he had an idea. Nash had left behind some money. It was not a huge amount, but it was a good sum from his military life insurance. Callan had put it all in a trust for his son, Barrett. He had not touched it since the legal papers were signed 7 years ago. His plan was to use it for Barrett's college education, to give his son more choices in life. But Barrett was only 9 years old. College was nearly 10 years away. If the garage grew and became successful, it could support them for a long time, instead of just getting by. That felt like something Nash would have wanted. Callan started doing his own math. He figured out how much he could borrow from the trust and still leave plenty for Barrett's future. The numbers could work, but he would have to be very careful. It would be tight, but it was possible. On Thursday morning he showed his calculations to Sloane. She looked them over at a corner table when the cafe was quiet. Jericho, her dog, rested his head on her knee while she studied the spreadsheet. This is possible. You will have to put all the profits back into the business for the first year, but your numbers are solid. These numbers are based on your idea that sales will go up. What happens if you are wrong? Then we are right back where we are now, but we will have a much nicer coffee machine. She looked up from the screen. But I am not wrong. I have been watching the customers all week. The people who come here want a place where they feel like they belong. If you give them that, they will return again and again. Callan really wanted to believe her. His other choice was to keep struggling every single month, always one big repair away from going broke. That was not a good future, especially with Barrett getting older and needing more things. "All right," he said. "Let us do this." Sloane blinked, surprised. "Just like that?" He nodded. "Just like that. But I am going to need your help. I need help with the planning, picking the new equipment and designing the new space. I am a mechanic, not a business expert. I can do all of that." She paused for a moment, then spoke more softly. "I want to do that." They shook hands over the table. Her grip was strong, even though he could see a small shake in her hands sometimes. Jericho's tail thumped on the concrete as if he were giving his own approval. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of organizing and preparing. The work kicked off on a Monday. A construction crew arrived at 6 a.m., sharp with their heavy equipment and some heavy attitudes. The garage stayed open, but the cafe had to close its doors for the remodel. Sloane came in every single day, walking with Jericho through the site, taking notes and correcting any workers who strayed from the plans. On the Thursday of that first week, Callan saw her sitting on the floor of the future dining area. Her back was against a wall that was nothing but bare studs. Jericho was beside her, his head resting in her lap. She was looking at nothing in particular, her expression so raw it was clear she was a million miles away. "Are you all right?" She did not speak right away. When she finally answered, her voice was empty and far away. It was 7 years ago today, the day in Kandahar. Callan sat down on the floor next to her, giving her some space. The anniversary of when Nash died was in September, but Sloane's memory of that day was different. She had been injured that day. She had seen people die, so for her the date on the calendar meant something else. "What do you normally do on this day?" "Nothing. I drink too much. I do not sleep very well. I try to avoid feeling like a person." She gave him a sideways glance. "This year I am sitting here on a dirty floor, planning a new business. It feels strange. It is better than the other option, right?" "Maybe." She was silent for a few seconds. Then she said, "I went to visit Nash's grave yesterday. I took Jericho, and we just sat there. I told him all about the cafe, about this job, and about how Barrett is teaching me that you can be sad and happy at the same time. What do you think he would say? He probably would have made a joke about me finally getting a real job. Then he would have asked if you were paying me a fair wage." Callan managed a small smile, even though the moment felt heavy. That sounds exactly like him. Sloane's hand reached out and touched his on the dusty floor. Their fingers intertwined for just a second before she pulled her hand away. "Thank you for this, for giving me a place where I can actually live, not just survive. You are doing more than just surviving now. You do know that, do you not?" He could see her swallow hard. "I am beginning to realize that. The cafe reopened 3 weeks after the construction began. It was completely changed. It barely looked like the old place. There were now 12 tables instead of 4. There was booth seating, and a real commercial espresso machine that cost more than Callan liked to admit. The walls were painted a blue-grey colour that Barrett had picked out. They were covered with old framed pictures of the garage. There was one of Callan's father by the original sign, and one of Nash in his uniform. There was even a new photo of Sloane behind the counter with Jericho sitting by her feet. The grand reopening was on a Saturday. By 8 in the morning the cafe was completely full. The usual customers came and found their favourite tables. But there were also new customers who were curious about the new paint and the signs Sloane had put on the sidewalk. Frank the Marine came with 3 of his friends. They were all veterans from different times and places. They sat in a booth for 3 hours, drinking coffee and telling stories. Before they left, they decided to meet there every Saturday morning. Barrett helped out during the busy morning. He cleared tables and refilled drinks with the focus of a boy who was given a very important job. Sloane operated the new espresso machine like a professional who had been doing it for years, not just a few days. She had persuaded Callan to hire a part-time helper for weekends. It was a college student named Maya who was always smiling and balanced out Sloane's quiet personality. By lunchtime they had served more people than the old cafe usually served in an entire week. At 4 o'clock, when they finally closed for the day, the 3 of them were tired but happy. Barrett fell into a booth with Jericho. They both looked completely exhausted. Maya counted her tips with a big smile. Sloane stood behind the new counter, looking at the busy room. Callan could see she was both satisfied and a little surprised. "We did it," she said, looking at him with a huge, genuine smile on her face. "We actually did it." The first month was a blur of busy, happy days. The group of veterans that Frank had brought in started to grow. News about the cafe spread through their community in ways Callan could never have reached. People began to visit not just for the great coffee, but for the welcoming feeling of the place. It was a place where you felt understood without needing to explain anything. When Barrett's 9th birthday came in late October, he wanted his party at the cafe with Sloane helping. She agreed without a second thought, working with Maya to take care of the other customers. One area was saved for the birthday party, and it was everything a 9-year-old boy could want. It was loud and chaotic, full of sweet snacks and wild energy that ended in sleepy exhaustion. Near the end, after most of the kids had gone home, Barrett gave Sloane a handmade invitation. He said, "This is for you, because you are part of our family now." Sloane accepted the card, her hands trembling just a bit. She saw a charming crayon drawing of herself and Jericho. She whispered, "Thank you, Barrett. I will keep this forever." After he ran off, she held the card carefully, like it was made of glass. Her eyes shiny with tears, she held back. Callan walked over to her. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Yes. I am just thinking about how a 9-year-old boy understands family better than most adults." Callan smiled. "He has good instincts. He gets that from his father," she replied, and the words felt surprisingly heavy. Callan looked in her eyes and saw something he had not let himself see before. It was attraction, but also something much deeper. "Sloane, please do not. Not yet." She put the card down gently. "I need to be okay with myself first, before I can be okay with us." "I can wait," he said. "I know. That is what makes this so hard." November came with an early snow, and the holidays were getting closer. During Thanksgiving week, Callan invited Sloane for dinner. Her grateful acceptance showed she had been hoping he would ask. The dinner was simple, but Barrett made sure the table was set perfectly. Sloane brought a very nice bottle of wine, and the whole evening felt deeply right, making Callan's heart ache in a good way. After Barrett went to bed, Sloane stayed to help clean the kitchen. They worked together in a comfortable quiet, washing and drying the dishes as Jericho slept nearby. After the last dish was put away, Sloane leaned on the counter and looked at Callan with an expression he could not quite read. "I have been thinking about what you said, about waiting." "Okay," he said. "I do not think you need to wait for me any more. I think this is as okay as I am going to be, and I believe that is good enough." Callan put down the dish towel he was holding. "Are you sure?" "I am," she said. "I am tired of being afraid all the time." He walked across the room until he stood right in front of her. He was close enough to see the small scar on her jaw and the way the light danced in her eyes. He was close enough to gently hold her face in his hands, and he wanted to very much. He did. Sloane leaned into his touch and closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, something had changed. She was letting him in. Her walls were down. Callan kissed her gently at first, giving her a chance to move away. She did not. Instead, she moved closer, her hands finding his waist as the kiss grew deeper, like a lonely soul finally finding an answer. They slowly pulled apart, resting their foreheads together as they caught their breath. Jericho had woken up and was watching them with a look that Callan was sure was one of approval. "Well," Sloane said with a light laugh he had never heard from her before. "Yeah, well," he replied. "What do we do now?" "Now," he said, "we will figure it out together, just like we do with everything else." December came with more snow, and holiday lights started to appear around the cafe. Barrett saw the change between Callan and Sloane right away. He had that special way of noticing things that kids have. He did not say anything about it, but he started including Sloane in all their plans more and more often. The cafe closed early on Christmas Eve. Callan asked Sloane to stay, and her acceptance felt like they were taking another big step together. Barrett opened his presents while they watched. Jericho wore a little bow-tie collar that Sloane had bought him as a joke, but he actually looked quite handsome. One of the gifts was from Sloane to Callan. It was a small box, and he felt nervous opening it. Inside was Nash's Navy SEAL trident pin, which had been with his brother's belongings. Sloane spoke softly. "I visited his parents. I asked if they would give this to you. They said Nash would have wanted his brother to have it. They said you earned it by raising Barrett and honoring his memory." Callan's hands were shaking as he held the small metal pin. It was not heavy, but the meaning behind it felt immense in the best possible way. "Thank you," he said. "This means— I do not have the words to say what this means." Sloane reached out and gently squeezed his hand. "You do not need words. I understand." Barrett had been watching them with interest. "Can I see it?" Callan passed the pin to his son. He watched Barrett look at it with deep respect, like he knew it was very important. "This was Uncle Nash's," Barrett said. "It was," Callan replied, And now it belongs to us. All of us. The boy gave the pin back to Callan, who attached it to his shirt pocket. The metal reflected the little Christmas lights on the walls. Later that night, after Barrett was asleep, Sloane and Callan sat on the couch. Jericho was stretched out at their feet. The house was peaceful, with only the sound of the furnace and the old house settling. Outside, snowflakes drifted down through the light of the street lamps. "I never imagined I would have this," Sloane said in a voice that was almost a whisper. "A place where I belong. People who do not look at me like I am broken." "You are not broken," he said. "You are just carrying a heavy weight that other people cannot see. Sometimes it feels like the same thing. No, broken means you cannot function. You are functioning perfectly. You just have a different way of doing it." She moved in closer, resting her head against his shoulder. "For 7 years I ran away from anything that was important. And then a dog remembered a scent, and my whole world shifted. Sometimes that is all it is. One single moment, one connection, everything changes. Do you think Nash knew? As he was dying, do you think he knew we would end up like this? I am not sure. Perhaps. He always said that things turn out the way they are meant to, even if it does not feel right at the time." Sloane was quiet for a very long moment. "I used to despise that way of thinking. It always felt like a poor excuse for horrible things. But as I sit here now, I believe I am starting to see his point. What changed you, Barrett? It was this whole unbelievable thing we have built together." She lifted her head and looked at him. "Nash died to save people. I am alive because someone saved me. And here we are, creating something good that honors both of those facts. It is not simple or fair, but it is real." Callan kissed her forehead and tasted the salt from her quiet tears. "Real is more than enough." New Year's arrived, and the cafe held a small, invitation-only party for their regular customers who had become friends. Frank came with his group of veterans. Maya brought her boyfriend. The construction workers who had fixed up the cafe even came by to see how it looked. At midnight, Callan stood behind the counter with Sloane, next to him and Barrett in between them. They watched their little community celebrate. Jericho sat nearby, calmly watching over everyone. The clock struck 12. Everyone cheered and hugged. The noise should have been too much, but instead it felt just right. Sloane's hand found Callan's, and their fingers linked together easily. Barrett looked up at them both, his smile so big and happy it seemed to fill his whole 9-year-old body. "This is the best New Year's ever." Callan met Sloane's gaze over his son's head. "Yeah, buddy," he said. "I think you might be right." Later on, after all the guests had left and the cleaning was finished, Sloane stood in the quiet cafe with Jericho. She looked around at the space they had built together. Callan watched her from the doorway and knew what she was seeing. It was a place where people who felt broken could come and feel whole again. It was a place where service and sacrifice were honored without words, and where coffee and kindness turned strangers into a community. She turned and saw him watching her. "What?" she asked. "I am just thinking about how much has changed. 6 months ago, this business was barely making it. Look at it now. 6 months ago," she added, "I was living in my car and not taking care of myself. Now I have my own apartment and a good job." She then motioned between the two of them. "And we have whatever this is." "This is family," he said. "That is what Barrett called it, and I think he was exactly right." Sloane's smile was soft and true, the kind she only showed when she felt completely safe. "Family," she repeated. "Yes, I like that." They locked the cafe together and walked into the crisp January night. Sloane's car was parked next to Callan's truck. A light dusting of new snow covered both of them. She stopped before opening her car door and looked back at the cafe with its warm light shining from the windows. Thank you for believing in me, for looking past my injury, the dog, and all the messy parts. Thank you for staying, he replied, for not leaving when things became difficult. The kiss they shared started cool from the night air and ended with warmth. I am done running, she said. This is where I am meant to be. Callan watched her drive off, her tail lights vanishing around the corner toward her new apartment. He could see Jericho's shape in the back, always on watch. He drove home on empty streets while the city was quiet in the early morning hours. Barrett was at a sleepover, so the house would be empty. But empty did not mean lonely anymore. It just felt like a peaceful moment between one wonderful thing and the next. Once inside, he placed the Navy SEAL trident pin on the mantelpiece, right next to a photo of Lena and a memorial picture of Nash. There were 3 different types of love, and 3 different types of loss. All of them were woven together to create the man he had become. His phone buzzed with a new message. Sloane's text was short but held so much meaning. Home safe. See you tomorrow. Love you. Callan stared at those final 2 words, the first time either of them had written it so plainly. His fingers moved over the screen without him even thinking. Love you too. Sleep well. He walked up the stairs to his room, feeling tired in his bones, but also deeply content in a way he had not felt since before Lena died. Outside, the streetlights held back the darkness in small, steady patches of light. Inside, the house settled with its usual gentle noises. Tomorrow was sure to bring new difficulties, but tonight, in the quiet pause between the year that was ending and the one about to start, everything felt right. The shattered pieces had finally found one another, and in doing so they learned they were never really broken, just waiting for the right moment to become.